Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Beyond Consulting podcast. Today, it's my absolute pleasure to speak with Nikolai Kirkeby. He is Chief Project Manager, Strategy and Transformation, and he works for Danske Bank. Nikolai, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's very exciting.
Nikolai, Danske Bank, I had a bit of a look when I was preparing. It's one of the leading banks in the Nordics with over 20,000 employees, it says, and more than 2.8 billion customers, individual customers. So, and also on the industry side, it's 1/3 of the large corporates in the Nordic that trust Danske Bank. So it's a very big bank. It's a massive organization. So, I think we're going to dive today a bit into transformation and especially also looking a bit into your personal story from consulting to industry, how to build large scalable organizations, and maybe even touch on project staffing, whatever that is, we're going to find out. And I'm really excited to have you on the show. Maybe if you want, you can give us a brief introduction of where you actually started and how you ended up in Danske Bank and what you're doing at Danske Bank.
Yes, sure. So maybe starting with the last, what I do, as you said, I work with projects and programs within IT. So I worked in our larger IT department, which is big. It's about 5,000 people, so around a quarter of the organization. And I work with IT projects and program management. And I've done so for the past couple of years. And I am in kind of an internal consultancy, meaning that this is a center of excellence under the strategy and transformation department where we get staffed to manage our larger programs. So some stuff is being managed in the departments around the bank, and some things are run as strategic programs, and those are the ones that I'm staffed into, if you will. My background is not in the financial sector. I spent a good 10 years in the Big Four auditing and consulting firms. I spent some time in a big global law firm, and before this, other bits and pieces, management consulting and other things. And I've been sort of around the block, so to speak. I've been in different business development roles. So some have been internal strategy execution, some have been external management consulting, also within the strategy execution space, if you will. Some have been commercial roles and business development roles. So a lot of different, but all sort of within a business development space. And then a few years ago, I moved into this 150-year-old, very conservative bank to try something new. I'm quite happy about that.
That's amazing, and one could even say you've seen it all. So you've seen consulting, you've seen a law firm, and now eventually moved into industry, into banking. And of course, my question is here, like, I mean, being a consultant myself for a long time, what was the motivation? What was the fascination that you said, look, I go actually from consulting to law, now eventually ending up in banking? What fascinated you so much to go that way?
Yeah. So of course, just a chance aside, because that also always plays a role. One consideration I had when moving from the consulting professional service space and then into the industry was that one thing that I always really liked was being in these companies where you could switch from project to project really fast. You could pitch new ideas and try something new, and there would often be someone, taking the bait and wanting to support this. And I think that was the dynamics which has been a great motivator for me which I think comes out of these partner-owned and led companies that I worked in. So, if you've ever been in a partner-led company, you know that each partner is sort of his own little or her own little king or queen, and they have their bunch of people and they do great things. And they also always have to move with the market. They need to find new clients and they need to staff project and they need to deliver things. So it's in the dynamic of those companies that you decentralize decision power as to what do we do now. And working as a business development person and sort of having that curiosity, which I do, made that really exciting. But then after a decade or so, what I also figured out is that what happens with this dynamic is that you can also quickly sort of lose focus and you have to start doing something new over. So you work a couple of years on a project and you think you're building big things, then a new idea comes up and you have to start working on that. And what I wanted to try was to go to a place where we sort of make these longer term commitments. So we are a publicly listed company, and when we make a promise to our shareholders and to the markets, is our board of directors and is our executive leadership team who's going public and saying, well, we're going to do this for the next 5 years, not on a super duper granular level, but still we make some promises from the strategy going sort of a bit ahead into the future. And so what I thought and what I have experienced is that this decision power on which initiatives that we will be working on, which I have, no influence. I just, follow the projects that I'm being put on. When I'm told that we are doing something and it will be for the next 4 years, then I know that that's actually true. We are really going to do this. And that kind of gives me some satisfaction to be able to work on things for a bit longer. So that's one thing that I appreciate and something that I was anticipating.
So it's really that it's getting bigger things done over a longer duration of time. You say that at a consultancy or partner-led firm, that would be very difficult to do.
I think it is difficult, yes, because you sort of, at least in my experience, you have you have a lot of partners who are doing great things together, and they might be moving sort of in a similar direction. But to a lesser degree, have you got these very big, centrally driven projects? I know that they are there, and I've also been part of them, and that can be very exciting. But in general, what you would have is decentralized decision making on these initiatives. Where I see where I work now is that you have a centralized decision making in place, and then what is then decentralized is decision on how to actually execute it. So at least in Danske Bank, this is what we do, and this requires some pretty good governance because, of course, it can go haywire. But having a good governance in place is of course a necessity, and it's something that actually in Danske Bank a few years ago, on a bit of a sad backdrop, actually. We had a very big money laundering scandal, and it led the CEO to get fired and a new one coming in, and sort of there was a need for something new to happen in the bank, and for a lot of good reasons, but also because of this not very great backdrop. This new CEO came in, and we had some experience in actually reorganizing the whole bank into this agile way of working. And this was, I think, a sort of a dual purpose project that he came in and did, because this was a very big project he wanted to start. So one thing was this need for top management to have a better grip on what is going on in the bank, and that was just a general ambition that we want this in terms of what's actually happening around, in the branches and in our subsidiaries, and then also how we're actually investing our money. So that was one purpose, and the other purpose was to build this agile organization where people would be more motivated, would have a higher productivity, and sort of all these benefits that you could expect from these agile setups. So there was a huge transformation, taking these around 5,000 people, a bit more at the time actually, reorganizing them from sort of these 8 silos that were working pretty independently, and sometimes also on the same projects, just not coordinating between them. And then into 26 individual tribes of about 150 people, each being these independent units that were then to deliver into the strategic themes that was decided by top management. So that was the big transformation.
And I mean, it must be shocking when you find out, there's such a big thing going on, and then of course it has ripple effects through the entire organization up to the CEO, as you describe it, and of course then maybe you start doing some transformation program with a lot of employees involved. How do you actually think about what capabilities you need going forward? That you need to develop. Because I understand you say that there were 8 silos and they were then 26 tribes afterwards. Was the silo thing basically the thing that you needed to break up? Why do you is it important to not have maybe silos? Is that what was basically happening?
Yeah. So from my understanding of this transformation, what especially top management wanted was to get a hold of how do we make investment decisions. So are we putting our time and energy and money in the right stuff? And they could not do that at the time because they did not have transparency in what was going on in each of these 8 silos. So in order to build something that was completely new and sort of shook things up, I think that was part of the change management thought around this. And then an external consultancy that I think very well was hired in to do this job. And again, it was a phenomenally large transformation, and getting the right people in the right places. Of course, there are still, as you say, ripple effects after that, and of course, not everyone came into the right spot that they wanted, and some people, stopped working at the bank. Other people came in, and so forth. So a lot of changes and also a lot of frustrations at the time. So no doubt about that. And a lot of people had to recalibrate their thinking around their role in the bank also. So some developers became product owners, and some business people became techies, and so there were a lot of shuffling around, which kind of, I think it's kind of settling now, but it certainly did take a few years before that had landed.
That's super interesting. Let's dive into it in a second. My one question that immediately sparked in me is, if I look at it from a more traditional management answer that you would probably get, and you say, well, we as a board don't have enough transparency on the 8 units. Well, why not just simply you demand it and set up a standardized reporting and problem solved?
Yeah, you could say that. And I think so that's, I talked about a dual purpose, and one purpose was the transparency. And then maybe shaking things up a little bit is one way to actually build in a completely new structure. But the other part was also the agility, building these units that were actually smaller, even though they're units of around 150 people. They're still smaller than these, almost 1,000 people big silos. And
What's the advantage if you have these smaller units compared to like those 8 silos that you described?
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. But so that's one thing. But in terms of actually getting the transparency, one thing which is built into this new model, which we call very originally better ways of working, but that is that we have 4 times a year we actually have this renegotiation, or at least going through the stack ranking of the strategic priorities in the organization. And every single one of the 26 tribes are then participating in this, we call it a market really, where some priorities are non-negotiable. So those are the regulatory ones, and there are some security ones that are non-negotiable. But then the other ones are actually discussed amongst all the tribes. So what can we pitch in? What's actually possible for us to do? How do we allocate our resources in the best possible manner? And so the idea here is that not only getting transparency, but also getting the tribes to deliver in the best possible manner depending on which other project is going on. So actually moving some of the strategic decision making, keeping that at the top of the organization, but the very top of the organization, but then having the decision on how to execute and when during sort of maybe 2-3 year period, pulling down that a little bit in the organization into that middle layer. That was the idea, and that's actually how it works.
How do you start with reorganizing 8 big silos with 1,000 people in there and breaking them into new units like 26? I don't know what was the number. Did you decide that number up front? It's going to be 26, or did that come up throughout the time? How did you go about it?
I think it was pretty much the number of people divided by 150 or something like that. I think the first thing to say about that is that I mentioned this new CEO coming in from ING, this huge Dutch bank, and he had actually been through a similar exercise there. So bringing in consultants who had experience in doing this was the starting point. Then a lot of discussions went back and forth as to what are we actually going to do. So, and if we're not going a bit off topic here, but there was a need to do something new in Danske Bank, and that was known for top management. And so they started thinking about what is this big new thing we're going to do? What will our sort of moonshot be? And then on the back of that, and because of other things, decided to do this big sort of revamp of the development organization. The rest of the bank, maintained pretty much the same. Of course, I mean, there were still changes, but that was not directly affected by this. So it was only this quarter of the organization.
When you think about those consultants coming in and helping you on the transformation, like how do you see the role of consultants in those in such a setting? Is it someone who brings the expertise? Is it someone who brings the coordination, the control, the communication? What's the key role of consultants on those transformations?
I think on a transformation like that, I mean, there are, of course, some operational roles, as you mentioned. That can be communications and that can be coordination and all these things. I think a key part of bringing consultants in to something this big is bringing confidence into the project. So having someone who has done this before, because this is uncharted territory for almost any organization doing a transformation this large. It's hugely expensive. It will create a lot of uncertainties. There are, of course, operational risk involved in this. How will this end up? And of course, because of the complexity, you can never plan this complete. Well, you can plan it, but the plan is never going to hold one-to-one. So I think having that confidence to begin with, having someone who actually did this before, I think that's, and I think you could say that in general for bringing in people from the outside, having done something before, having that certain expertise that you don't have. And that can be in big things such as this, or it can be in smaller things, really needing someone who has this particular expertise in this corner of the project that I'm working with right now. So definitely a huge role for externals.
Would you say in those 26 tribes that you've created now, there is a need for consultants in those tribes? Or we talked a bit about before doing the podcast, and I learned they are all self-organizing. So let's say one of the tribes says, look, we need an external specialist. They would just do it. Or how would it work?
But there is, and actually, I don't think that need is changed after the reorganization, because consultants still play the same role. So you either buy extra capacity for some operational task for a period of time. So if you are a tribe in Danske Bank and you need to deliver on something and you cannot get the people that you need right now, then using externals it's a good way to go. And then there's also bringing in a knowledge from the outside, and even though there are a lot of people working on this, we still cannot know everything. So So that's the thing, and we do use consultants a lot. But that's so this is for the IT development part. But then we also have the whole strategy space, and sometimes it's quite clever to get people with other industry insights or people who have experience in developing something or doing huge organizational transformations coming in and giving their perspective. So definitely there's a big need for this. I don't think that has changed actually.
And going back to the tribes, because I find it super fascinating that you described that large transformation from going from 8 silos into 26 teams. They're all self-organized. The motivation is higher. They have a better feeling of accomplishment also once they, deliver on all their things. And of course, I think we're talking about mostly about the IT, or let's say development organization. When you say they are self-organized, yeah, what does it mean? Are they, because they potentially could not take the business decisions? Where does it come together? And let's say, where does it end? So I could imagine if someone says very high up in the organization, look, we need to do this, yeah, but the tribe would say, we don't think it's a good idea, but still we need to do this.
Yeah.
How would the discussion continue?
So banks, of course, are very much risk driven. So we always consider risk. It also means that risk has to be owned at the right level in the bank. So if we have very huge material risk, it has to be owned very high up in the organization. So if some initiative bears a very big risk, let's say it's something that could potentially have a big financial risk if we are not able to make some financial transactions, and it will cost us a huge amount of money, or that this will have some reputational damage, and the markets will say, oh my God, what are they doing in there? And then our stock price would drop, and that would cost money for our investors. Then that is a risk which is owned very high up, and so probably our executive leadership team would say, well, you need to prioritize this. And it has to be done within the next 18 months. So that would be their instruction. And then it will go into these annual business reviews that we have. And it would be put out as something, say, well, we need to do this within the next 18 months. And then there would be a negotiation between the tribes, coordinating who does what and when can we deliver this, if it's different tribes involved in this. And that should come together. If it does not come together, if it's complete mess, and I mean these are adults and very experienced leaders, so normally it actually does come together. But let's say that someone says, well, we can't do it, and we have other priorities, then it would simply be escalated. So we would escalate, and then eventually it would be a top management decision saying, well, you have to do it now. So that's how that would end, and that does not happen very often, to my knowledge. But so of course sometimes there could be something like that. What happens more often is within a program, for example. So what I'm working on now, we have different tribes involved, and they have different priorities. And as we move along, we find out that, we also need an input from another tribe. And then we have to go talk to them and say, by the way, we need a deliverable from you next month. And then they would tell us, well, we're sorry, we are, our capacity is completely full. And then we have to accommodate that into our planning. And that is just something that happens on an ongoing basis all the time. And then, of course, if we cannot meet one another in, normal discussions, then again, it's something that would need to be escalated in terms of saying, well, this is a risk, we cannot take it for the project. So we need to go above, our own mandate and speak to those above us. I would say in practicality, it's really just a discussion back and forth. It's not something very mechanistic where we have to escalate all the time. That's not really how it works. It kind of works fairly smoothly, I would say.
Super, and it's great that you've made these great experiences also with implementing the agility in the organization. Nikolai, I think that is really a great example. Yeah, I mean, if you look back, yeah, on that path. I'm not sure, is it complete yet? What are the next steps to come? And if you were maybe to draw a couple of advice from the last years where we implemented all these changes to our listeners, what would it be?
From the implementation, I have to say that that doing this huge implementation, I was actually not part of this. I just came into the organization when it was done. I did write an MBA thesis around this a year ago, so that's why I'm kind of into it. But I will say that the change management part, I think, can never ever be overestimated. I mean, having a good solid internal communications around why is it that we are doing this and what are we trying to achieve, and what will happen next, and communicate to people sort of way down into the organization. I think that's a great learning, and something which is often not done because focus is sort of on the organizational bits, trying to get people placed in the right spots, and setting up metrics, and figuring out sort of the project bits and pieces. So communications and change management, I think that's something that.
And if you go one step, like how did you make sure that it actually happened in the end? So you say like it's difficult to not do it or deprioritize it.
Well, so for the new organization that we have now, I mean, it's not possible not to prioritize it, because this is simply the way that we get go to get things done. So I cannot start a large program without having that signed off at the proper level in the organization. And so that person, so for my program, for example, it's a person in our executive leadership team has to sign off on this. Otherwise, I cannot start it simply. And so that person, of course, will know what is it that we have prioritized. So I think that mechanism is quite well worked in. And then, of course, there's the part about, do people feel do people feel the motivation, and do they like working in these independent units? And I think that's something that is still being worked on, and people are still trying to sort of find their footing in this new setup. Because again, we have people who have been in the bank for 40 years and longer, and of course, having a huge change like this it's a big deal, especially if you have been in the same setup for many years. It does require some new thinking and calibration of your own roles.
Can teams change their employees? And like, let's say team 26 wants to exchange one member with team 24. Would that be possible? Can they just do it?
They can, and people routinely move around the bank into new jobs. But it would be moving into a new job. But of course, there's a lot of internal mobility. But these teams are not to be seen as project teams. So when we staff or don't staff for projects and programs, what we actually do is that we ask for deliverables from a tribe or from multiple tribes, and then they internally need to figure out how do they actually deliver this. So I am not asking a team for please give me a deliverable manager and 4 developers and a test manager, for example. I just ask them to please deliver these chunks of the project, and then they will do that. Mm-hmm. So that's the model. And then in reality, of course, we have to coordinate a lot, because we need to figure out so what is it actually in this work package, and when can we fit it in, and could we chop it up in 2 and deliver some now and some later and all that. So of course there's a lot of ongoing discussions like that. It's not a machine, a factory machine. It is human beings working together.
Yeah, in the end, it always comes down to the individual or the human.
It does. It very much does come down to the human, and I think that human factor is probably the most interesting about working in big organizations. I mean, we can all draw up these big diagrams of silos and tribes and units and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's very much getting into those dialogues and having people sort of convinced that they should prioritize something because it's super exciting. So I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's
Nikolai,
all
if
about
listeners should take one action after this episode, what, in talking about now executives, transformation leaders, what would you suggest it be?
Well, it certainly depended what they were doing. I think so. Maybe looking at the role that I am given in this organization is to tie together those different units where there are not some direct bonds between them. So during a program, we don't have some mechanism for two tribes to talk to one another. And then they actually hired this role, which I am in. We call it a theme integrator. I don't think they exist anywhere else, but that's what we call them. But basically, what we are employed to do is to make sure that units talk to each other. So if I was to recommend one thing to go out and start doing, it's maybe going out and visiting those other units and figuring out what is it that they do and how can we help one another. Because that's not done enough in any of the organizations that I have been in.
Thank you very much. I think it's great advice, connecting the teams, making sure everything flows together. Nikolai, it's been my pleasure, and thanks for joining us today. If people want to reach out and to learn more from you, how could they reach out to you?
Oh, LinkedIn is a great way. So please reach out and tell me what you think. And thank you very much for having me. It's very interesting discussions we've had, I think.
Absolutely, Nikolai. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for being part of the show. And glad to connect anytime soon, and wishing you a great afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And likewise.